Good afternoon, Wyoming. I'm Dr. John Ogle. Just got off a medical flight. I'm going to take my mask off as we are socially distancing inside the studio. And we were asked to address some concerns on how Wyoming is going to implement the COVID vaccine mandate coming from the federal level. There's some fantastic questions. And before we begin, I just want to introduce the format a little bit. We are aiming for an eventual Q&A session close to real time. But what we did was we collected anonymized concerns and questions from the soldiers and airmen of the Wyoming Air and Army National Guard, and we got over 700 questions, and there are some fantastic questions. And we're going to pick through some of those. We're kind of lumping them together, but we want to introduce ourselves and introduce this new format. Over the next 6 months, there's a lot of friction and stress about the mandatory COVID vaccine, so we want to kind of address how we're looking at it. And I'd like to introduce Captain Eller. A lot of you know her as Kat. So she is one of our finest flight nurses here. She is a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, of course. She became a vaccine specialist nurse and then went into ortho and neuro, and then eventually saw the light and came to the emergency department where I work on the civilian side. And then she went to the VA in Cheyenne. Many of you know her from there. And she's a nurse educator there now. And recently we have been very lucky to find somebody with such experience. And she is our full-time medical planner, helping us deal with the ever-changing COVID rules, the Wyoming implementation of the rules, how we're addressing very reasonable soldier and airman concerns about this rather new virus and even newer vaccine. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Captain Eller for a moment, and we're going to start addressing your question.
Thank you, Dr. Ogle. So this is Colonel Ogle, our state air surgeon, and he has his doctorate, of course, as well as a master's in public health and epidemiology. So he's very well versed to go ahead and answer some of these questions for us, as this is a really new virus that we're looking at. And with that, we'll get started.
Great. Well, thank you, Kat. Yeah, it is a new virus, and I don't have many of the answers. I'm watching the news as eagerly as the rest of you and trying to figure out which side to believe on this. That's what's neat about medicine. Unlike flying airplanes where you have a checklist, and there is a technique and a procedure, in medicine it is really an art. And so I would take issue with one thing. I'm going to address these questions, not necessarily answer them. I'm going to address them the best I can, because a lot of them we are still seeking answers for. But we had a giant pool of questions, most of them really well thought out. They're anonymized, but I'll give credit to Dr. Washburn, who helped collate them and summarize them, and Dr. Pete Cronin went over some of these today with me. Also talked to Colonel Dibert, the wing commander, earlier today, as well as Major Smith on the flight. So we have pretty much fresh input to our answers. The responses we're going to give to your questions. But by no means should this be taken as authoritative, because our guidance is changing frequently. Just want to calm some nerves that October drill, which will start tomorrow, is not a time where you have to come to Cheyenne ready to give up your career and go to the mat and not retire because they're making you get a vaccine that you don't want. It's not quite going to be like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the procedures of what to expect on the drill, and we're basically going to, we looked at the questions independently, and we came up with some of our most representative questions from the field, and we'll start going with responses to your questions.
So Colonel Ogle, why should I get this vaccine if it's not 100% effective?
So that's a great question, and I hear that from my own family members, and it's a fine question. And I'll start by saying, of course, nothing is 100%. The vaccine was never claimed to be 100% effective. Driving on the road, flying an airplane, there's no 100% guarantees. So, like other things in life, it's a risk management. You know, if you make a decision to forego the vaccine for the time being, you're making a deliberate decision to accept the risk of a known virus that's out there versus the slightly more abstract and I would say lower risk of the vaccine. Neither of those are zero. There have been people who have gotten sick from the vaccine. There are vanishingly small numbers of those. And it often boils down to what you trust. You trust this person's reporting or this political side's reporting or that side. So my general advice that I've been giving with increasing confidence over the last 9 months is that the risk of the vaccine, though not zero, is much lower than the risk at any age of being part of this globe. Really, it's a global problem and being exposed to the germs. You all probably by now know someone, young, fit, flyers that have had COVID. Some people are still DNF, are really having the long stander syndromes. They're just not getting over it. They have foggy brains. Their heart and lungs aren't quite up to speed. There's a lot of different names for it. We don't have all the medical science down, but we see long duration side effects from COVID. We're not seeing that from the vaccine.
So what side effects should we expect?
So there will be side effects. I had side effects. We all have them. Most of them are minor. A little bit of pain in the injection site, especially after the second vaccine. You can have some muscle aches. Few people have had more serious side effects, such as myocarditis, pericarditis. Nobody in the National Guard has had any significant side effects here from the vaccine. Nationwide, the last count this past week's state air surgeon call, there were 17 fatalities in the Guard, and they were all among people who did not get the vaccine. So again, that's the risk-benefit measure. But there can be all kinds of side effects. We're collecting anything, especially in the first 7 days after you get the vaccine, that you think is abnormal, and that goes into the VAERS reporting system. And anything that becomes permanent, you are free to apply for a LOD, line of duty, and that addresses some of these questions. Is the government going to take care of me if I have a lifetime sequela or consequence from the vaccination? So yes, especially if you're in the, I got ordered to get it, I kind of dutifully but semi-reluctantly went and got my shot. If you have consequences, you're covered. Even if you do that under a order, a lawful order, and you go to a local pharmacy, you're still covered. You can apply for a line of duty, and if it's found to be connected, service connected to some insult that the military put on you, whether you were shot by the Taliban or you had a vaccine reaction, that's covered. And that doesn't matter if you got it in the civilian side or on military status. Now, if you went on your own time and got it, it's a little tougher. It's just like when you get cancer or you pick up a disease in between drills, that won't necessarily be connected. And so far, we've been very lucky. There haven't been any claims, any major claims, but you will be covered. So the answer to that is, we'll take care of you.
Okay. So you're going to take care of me, but what are some of the serious side effects I should be looking for?
Well, there were 7 women that had a blood clot in the suture, the sagittal suture inside the brain. That was from the J&J vaccine. There have been some, all mild, I can't tell you the exact numbers, of myocarditis. The most recent count, there was 10 that I knew of that went in, and this is nationwide, not just in Wyoming. They went in and got monitored, so that's the EKG monitor, shows some irregular heart rhythm, but just like your other muscles, when you get a disease or you get a vaccine, you're going to have some inflammation. So you're going to have this achiness, and we probably have it every time we get a cold or flu in the heart, but we're not looking so closely. There haven't been any heart attacks or permanent cardiac damage from the vaccine yet.
So, Colonel Ogle, if I get number 1 Pfizer and I get COVID in between my first and second vaccination, how long should I wait before I get the second vaccine?
Fantastic question. And we have had a few people like that. So especially now, during the Delta spike the last 2 months, the people that were getting it were all the unvaccinated people. And about that time, a lot of people in the civilian side were deciding to get their first dose, and then they got COVID. So the answer is you can delay that second shot that's normally scheduled at 21 days. And the CDC has varied between 14 and 90 days. Currently, as of this morning, it's as long as you're getting better. I think you were able to verify that ever-changing data point. For my comfort zone, I've just been saying wait a month, and that's a rare condition. This is picking up confirmed COVID in between your Moderna or Pfizer mRNA vaccines? So great question, and just keep us posted. Keep Sergeant Quinlan, myself, any of the medical group on the Army or the Air side. If you get in one of these odd situations, we'll help steer you right. You're still going to get your square check for all my vaccinations are up to date, even if you delay that second dose out. And by the way, even if you got J&J or Moderna, which are not the mandatory Pfizer ones, you still get credit, and that greens you up, so to speak, for your vaccination status.
Can I ask an opinion of you, sir?
Oh, I give them all the time.
Which vaccine would you recommend and why?
So I love it. It is an opinion. The Pfizer manufacturers will say it's theirs. Of course, my personal opinion at the moment, ever changing, is Moderna, which we had been offering. We don't have any this weekend, but when they came out, Pfizer and Moderna were about the same, 94-95% instantaneous effectiveness for protecting you against COVID. J&J, a single shot non-mRNA vaccine, was closer to high 80s, depending on who you ask. Then there's the durability, which is what I'm basing my answer today on. So we found that Pfizer actually drooped off the effectiveness, the immunity that's conferred, drooped off after, at the 6-month point, it was down to about 80%. Moderna was around 90%. J&J was much lower, 60%. So none of these vaccines are as long-lasting as we would like, but because of that kind of durability factor, if you really want to make the decision, what I'm recommending to all my patients, civilian, military, and family members, just go to the Walmart, the Walgreens, get a Moderna vaccine. It'll satisfy your military requirement, and that seems to be emerging as the best one at the moment. All of them will satisfy the requirement. Pfizer is the one that commanders are allowed to mandate because it is off emergency use authorization. It has full approval. So it's a very confusing concept. So I'm recommending Moderna. It grants you fill the square on the military side, but Pfizer should be just as good. They both likely to require boosters in the future. They're both imperfect. They both have similar side effect profiles.
So why would they require a booster?
Well, that has to do with the durability. So it's different than the flu shot booster. Flu changes every year, the strains that we get. So we reformulate the flu vaccine every single year, and that's why you get a repeat flu shot. It's not technically a booster. Hepatitis, for example, you have a series of 2, and the second one takes your partially primed immune system and finishes it off and makes you as immune as you're going to be. So the art of how much booster is needed is an evolving science. The clinical trials focus on immediate effectiveness and safety, and then the booster issue, which is being debated right now all over the world, but certainly in Washington and our CDC, most likely we're going to need boosters. Whether that's going to be required in the military, who knows? This is rough. This is the first new vaccine we've mandated in a long time.
Yes, I think the last one was anthrax, am I correct?
Well, if you don't count the flu shots, that's right. And we do require the Shingles vaccine for older airmen and soldiers like myself, but that's not till much older. In the vaccine requirements, so that goes, you bring up another good point, a lot of liberty, and I'm fighting for the Constitution, as I am too, not a particular president. I swore an oath, lawful orders for the Constitution. Not Trump, not Biden, Constitution. So it's well established that the Constitution is a concept, and it's fluid. And George Washington actually mandated in the Revolutionary War smallpox vaccines. And so I want to get to that. Let me always chokes me up when I talk about Constitution. So liberty and freedom are what we fight for. When we join the military, we give up some of that. We knowingly give it up. We still have constitutional rights. I have the right to free speech. Believe me, I run my mouth on the cameras all the time. I am anti-anthrax vaccine to this day, even though I've had some reluctantly. Sometimes you pick your battles, and I get those. I deploy frequently. The risk-benefit is pretty far down the line on that one. It's safe. It's safe enough. There's an abstract risk of anthrax spores being used in biological warfare. It's a real risk, but it's really hard to conceptualize. Whereas take something like measles or polio or even smallpox, which the only disease we've eradicated from the planet. Those vaccines, very effective, very safe, and it's a real risk. I've met patients that have polio, met patients overseas that had measles. One out of 1,000 die with measles. So it's tough to give up liberty, but sometimes for public health, we do as a society. When I fly on an airline, I don't get to carry my sidearm. I don't get to smoke if I choose to smoke. During some parts of participating society, inside or outside the military, just to make society work, we forfeit some liberties for part of the time. I think this is a good decision to do it, but I'm not a knee-jerk pro-vaccine, not even all the ones on our list. This one, because of the reality of the threat, I see young people suffering COVID in the hospital all the time, and it's just a bewildering new pandemic. I've been practicing medicine since the 90s. This is, to me, real. I see the patients. You can talk to any medical provider, and they'll say the same thing if they're still working in a clinic somewhere. So it's not a theoretical risk, it's a real risk. I know people that were impacted by this, so the threat is real. Unlike, I've never known a polio person or a smallpox person. We know people that do that. The safetiness does take time to establish, so I can say with less confidence and certainty this is absolutely safe. There's no guarantees that 20 years from now we won't discover some side effects. So that is a legitimate concern. So I think it's safe, it's effective, it's a real risk. So unlike some of the vaccines like human rabies, for example, which is available, I do not recommend them. There's HIV vaccines, which are highly experimental at this point. Don't recommend them. But we don't have really good treatment for COVID once you get it. Some people, for unpredictable, unforecastable reasons, get very sick in the hospital, even young people, even pregnant women, and they die. The perinatologists have not seen that many women in the ICU since COVID started. This was just our discussion on the call this week, 2 days ago. So that's why I think it's not purely a give up liberty question, and there is rationale for what we're asking ourselves to do.
Right. So you mentioned pregnant women. How should they go about getting the vaccine?
Great question. It is a hot topic. It's an important topic. So I don't know that much about it, so I listen to experts that I trust. So the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ACOG, definitely a body of experts. They're recommending, even if you're pregnant or lactating, you get the vaccine. With the Air Force, or really the whole DOD has decided, you know, just like we're telling the troops, we're going to pick our battles. And if you're pregnant, you're not deployable, so you get a temporary exemption until your EDC, your estimated date of confinement, when you deliver. Now, when you're lactating, you don't have that exemption, that automatic built-in medically administrative exemption. But if you're pregnant, not if you might become pregnant, but if you're pregnant, you will be granted a temporary exemption until you deliver. So even though my personal advice on the civilian side is, you're pregnant, you're 10 weeks pregnant, you're unvaccinated, what should I do? For best hope of delivering a viable, healthy baby, you should get the vaccine. First, second, or third trimester, you should do it. So that was my advice, civilian hat on. The military is not requiring pregnant women to get the vaccine. Automatic exception if you so choose. Great question.
Thank you. And can you talk a little bit about the so-called bait and switch?
Okay. This has been a hot topic too. So the bait and switch is a concern based on the approval date of the Pfizer vaccine sometime in August. At that moment, they had, it's like a launch of a software, they had a new name, called it Comirnaty. And it was a conflation of community and mRNA and 4 different words in there. So it's a hard word to say, Comirnaty. So it was the same formulation that went through its 1-year approval process, approximately 1 year. And then instead of Pfizer, BioNTech, 547, whatever its experimental name was, without changing, clinically changing the formulation, they changed the name. And some people have looked at the paperwork, attorneys in other states and whatnot, and been very suspicious that it might be a bait and switch. Well, how come you did all this 160 million doses and observations and all this, and now once it gets approved, you substitute a different chemical that you're going to put in the arms? That would obviously be a foul. So that's not happening. So those two, Pfizer and Comirnaty, just like a brand name, are interchangeable.
Okay, so if I wanted to get the Pfizer vaccine and the flu vaccine this weekend, could I do that?
You got the best question. You picked the best of them. So I'm going to get my flu vaccine this weekend. As far as if you want to get both of them right now, I would say it's up to you. You can. So the official answer, military and civilian, co-administration is fine. One in your left arm, one in your right arm. And we have them both. So you can do that. The only one we can't co-administer is smallpox. If anybody's still getting smallpox, I don't even think we have that this weekend. But all the other ones, yes. It might not be the smartest move because if you have some side effects, the flu is different every year. Talk about a new vaccine, it's always brand new every year. You might not know which one to attribute it to. So the answer is yes, you can get them together. The choice is yours. If you've already vaccinated, it's a moot thing. If you want to get Moderna instead of Pfizer, go do that. This weekend, all we're going to do is make sure you state through your unit health monitor what you intend to do. It's not time to come up here and make a decision, okay, I'm out of here 19 years, I'm giving up retirement. That's not what this weekend is about. And you will have a private interaction with a provider in the medical group, if you so choose, and you're going to have a chance, not in Facebook Live or any format like this, but private, like medicine's supposed to be one-on-one with the provider, to relay some concerns. And if there's any concerns, or if you want to start the medical exception request process, you can do that this weekend. But you're not going to be forced to say, nope, I refuse the vaccine, I'm out of here. So it's not going to come down that. You will have to kind of relay your intentions, what you plan to do. Okay, I'm going to get it this weekend. I've been thinking about doing my own research. United Airlines making me do it. I'm going to do it. Or I'm going to do a religious appeal. Where do I start the paperwork on that? Or, I've let my commander know I'm not getting the vaccine right now, and I'm going to think about it. So you're going to tell us what your pathway is going to be.
Okay.
The vaccine messes with our genetic code. That's a really good one. So it is the first genetic vaccine that we've had. But so how it works, and another one is how does mRNA work? Messenger RNA basically is a molecule of genetic code that does not go into the nucleus where the DNA and RNA are. So it doesn't actually mess with your genetic code. It goes to the mitochondria. If you remember way back, 8th grade biology, the cell organelles, little structures inside the cell. So the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, is extranuclear. And this messenger RNA, or mRNA, goes there, and then for each molecule of nucleotides on the strand, your own cell makes about 1,000 copies of a protein. So messenger RNA translates a nucleic genomic sequence, but not in the nucleus, to a protein, and that becomes your own manufacturer of an inactivated portion, the spike protein, of the coronavirus. So that's how you prime the body to be more immune when you face the real thing. Great question that you guys, several of you answered that one, and you can look up how mRNA works. I had it on a couple slides, but it's pretty interesting. But bottom line, it does not interact with your genetic code, who you are. So we can talk about stem cells and the cell line, which was a concern for some people. It went against religious objections because aborted fetal tissue from the 1970s, a Norwegian aborted fetus, they established some immortal cell lines. Immortal means they just don't have aging, they're just like a cell. So if you do a liver or a kidney transplant, if we do that, a whole organ is being translated. We were able to get cells immortal, so they just reproduce without ever aging. And a lot of vaccines and medicines are tested against that, including measles, polio, flu, stuff you've already had. The Pope actually weighed in on this because the Catholic Church is pretty much against any kind of research with aborted fetuses or anything like that. But these are just cell lines, and during the Reagan administration, so 80s, there was no more research lines. So these are basically thousands of generations old. And the Pope has even said, you know what, ethically, it does more good for society to go ahead and use these kind of products that were derived from this distant aborted fetuses that are miscarried, I think. So all the stem cell research is a little bit abstract from this, but I would encourage you to ask the chaplains about that, any religious complaints, or not complaints, but concerns, if it violates your principles. Do talk to the chaplains about that. Scientifically, it is a real thing. There is a cell line that was derived, and many of our modern vaccines were tested against those cell lines. Not fetuses, not humans, not in a clone laboratory, but one cell line.
Okay. One last question before we leave for today. Am I going to have to quarantine once I receive this? Is it a live vaccine like the flu intranasal vaccine was that we received a few years ago?
Great question. So the practical timelines. So if you're a flyer, you're DNF for 48 hours. It's not a live vaccine, and you do not have to quarantine. If you happen to be sick, you might have to quarantine because of that. If you happen to get exposed before the fully vaccinated declaration period, which is 2 weeks after your second vaccine, you will have to quarantine, isolate just like normal. But the vaccine itself does not impose any other restrictions on you besides the 48 hours DNF. So you could go in the morning, come right back to work.
Excellent. All right, well with that, we're going to wrap this up for today. This is going to be a series, so we look forward to your questions coming in. You can either leave comments down below or email them to wildguard@gmail.com.
Thank you, Captain Eller, and thanks, folks at the PA office at the Operations Center. This is going to be a great format, and we welcome more questions. Keep them coming.